Hello and welcome to Weekly MTG. I'm your host Blake, and this couch is very casual. We've got a different look because we have four guests on this week, three guests, four people on this week, and we have a unique show because we are going to be talking about Foundations, of course, which releases everywhere this upcoming Friday. And if you got to play in a pre-release, that was last weekend. Hopefully you did. Foundations is fun and cool and great and all those things. But we have a very kind of like specific show today because Foundations is meant to be the sort of like starting point for players. It's going to be the way a lot of people learn how to play Magic and the way a lot of people fall in love with Magic. And so we are going to talk today about how to use Foundations specifically to teach people to play Magic. Now, if you're watching this show, chances are pretty good that you know and love and enjoy Magic. If you don't, if you're new, welcome. You're going to learn some things today too. But really the focus of this show is if you want to teach a friend how to play Magic, like this guy here, this is going to be the way to do it. We're going to give you some tips and tricks. We're going to talk about how the design team thinks about teaching Magic, the philosophy behind it, ways to do it, how the beginner box can really help. So to talk through all of that, I have two wonderful guests and then also Matt Tabak. And so let's introduce ourselves real quick. Let's start down on this end with Cameron.
Yep, I'm Cameron Williams. I'm a Magic game designer, so I work on making cards. And I also spend a lot of time thinking about how to teach people Magic, how we can gear our products like the Foundations Beginner Box towards teaching people why Magic is awesome and how to play. And the only thing I'll add to your introduction is if you needed a sign to teach your friends to play Magic, this is your sign. You should do it. It's awesome. Magic is awesome. You'll enjoy teaching them. They'll enjoy learning. And the Beginner Box is a great way to do that.
Hi, I'm Mary Catherine Amiable You. I am a senior game producer for game design. I am also in charge of the Phyrexian language and also the person internally that a lot of people go to teach new hires how to play Magic. I'm here because, besides those things, I was the producer for all of Foundations and particularly Beginner Box here. And so did a lot of work, especially because it's a brand new product, figuring out what we were going to make.
All right.
Hello. I have been present for the entirety of this recording. My name, according to the graphic just below me, is Matt Tabak. I'm a principal editor inside of Magic R&D. I work both with game designers and with the creative folks to basically put together all the pieces of a Magic card to make the excellent products that you know and love. I worked with the Foundations team pretty much every step of the way, working on both the cards and the entirety of the beginner box, the tutorial experience, and I'm excited to talk about those things with you today.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things that we've sort of pecked away at in various panels and articles and discussions, but haven't really gone deep into, is how our Wizards Magic's philosophy of teaching Magic has changed so much over the years. And so I'm wondering, and we can start down here with Cameron. What sort of is, how do you and the team think about the philosophy behind teaching Magic? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think for a long time, the instinct, and it's a natural instinct, was to get new players to play a correct game of Magic as quickly as possible. So the goal is...
Untap, upkeep, draw.
Exactly, right. Like, you know all the steps of the turn, you know how combat damage works, you understand all the keywords, and all the actions that you take during your turn are correct according to the rules of Magic.
Yeah.
Now you know how to play. But the real goal, I think, and something that we really focused on when we were working on Foundations is you want to teach someone why Magic is awesome.
Yeah.
No matter how correct the game that you first play is, if you understand why Magic is awesome, you know, you have learned how to play. And I think I think a lot of our experiences first learning to play Magic speak to that truth, where like I remember when I first learned to play at summer camp, or when I was playing in the lunchroom in middle school, like when I was first a Magic player, I thought that Mind Break Trap just let you exile any number of non-land permanents, because someone told me that everything that isn't a land is a spell, right?
There you go.
So I was very far away from playing correct games of Magic, but I loved the game, and I was building decks, and I was playing with my friends.
Because you
and I
got
was
to
thinking
just
about it all the time.
exile their board whenever
Well,
you want.
that's a fair point, yeah.
That
If
does
you-
sound fun.
You're right.
Gotta say, can I
Right,
play
if
that?
you, I recommend teaching your friends in a way that makes all of their cards broken, so they have a good time.
Right,
is
there
what
you
I'm
go.
getting at.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think like Foundations really is all about that, and you can see that in the design of the set in terms of. In many cases, we made decisions to make the cards or the limited environment awesome instead of just simple. Now it is simple.
Yeah.
Like we want to make sure that it's approachable. That's something we were constantly thinking about. But it's important that it isn't approachable at the expense of awesomeness and at the expense of teaching people why Magic is cool.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, like the number one thing to keep in mind when you're teaching someone to play is like the main goal is to get them to want to play the second game.
Yeah.
Yeah, building off of this, there was a huge thing we were thinking about when designing this is a common thing we see. You know, a lot of people teach their friends how to play Magic. We know that that is like one of the most popular things. They're like, oh, please come play Commander with me. And so I used to run a comic book shop years ago, and for a short period of time, I was the only woman TO in Seattle, and that meant that everyone brought their friends and romantic partners to me. And I saw this then, I see this now, and we saw it a little bit in our testing. People forget what it was like to be a new player. They forget that their job isn't to catch someone up as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Their job is to take them on a journey. Their job is to like think about what was magical for Magic for them and how they got in and like what really clicked with them and what they loved and like take them on that journey. And that was just a really huge thing with Foundations. And the beginner box is like the goal isn't to get you caught up. The goal isn't that like, okay, we're gonna spend an afternoon playing this and then you get a commander deck and then you're done. That's all you need to know. The goal is that you go on this journey with your friends and you experience it and you fall in love with it, because that's someone that wants their second game, and more than just their second game. That's the someone that wants their like 5th and 10th and 50th and 1,000th game.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I learned how to play, it was definitely not correct. And it was, you know, my friend and I sitting on the floor of our playroom or whatever, figuring it out as we went along and referencing the really tiny rule book at the time, which whoever thought that was a good idea. But yeah, I don't know. It probably took me years to play correctly, and that didn't stop me. Yeah.
So what you're quickly going to learn, watching this stream, what you're quickly going to learn is when talking about teaching a new player Magic, we don't know anything. Now, if you're
something.
Thanks, Matt.
now if you're our managers,
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
That's all we've got to say.
Yeah.
if you're our managers, we know quite a bit. But my point here is, teaching people Magic is a very individual experience. So how to teach a specific person Magic, we don't know. We can't tell you. But what we're going to do, or we're going to try to do, is give you kind of a breadth of tools, hints, tips, tricks, experiences, angles that you can use. Because a lot of people think Magic is a game, and Magic isn't a game. I tell this to people all the time.
Oh,
Magic is not a
Yeah?
game. It's not. Magic is 36 activities in a trench coat, 31 of which are games. And very few people like all 36. I don't like all 36, right? There's like a billion ways to play Magic. There's lore, there's art, there's collecting, there's content creation. There's so many ways to engage with Magic, and finding what someone is going to fall in love with, that's the key to getting them to be probably a Magic player, but not everyone that loves Magic plays.
Yeah.
So, and maybe you're going to find one of those. And for some people, the lifeblood of Magic, the connection, the magic of Magic is what I fell in love with the comprehensive rules.
Well, that is
Right?
a good
Yeah.
a good transition because Matt, I want to hear from you. You know, Cameron started this out by saying like, no, it's not important, and in fact, it's kind of important not to be making sure that they're following every step of the rules along the way.
Yeah.
As a former rules manager, how does that ring with you?
Yeah, no, Cameron's right. The details are really not important when you're playing. You want to give them kind of a basic structure.
Yeah.
What I find is really important when playing with a newer player is kind of getting them involved in the story of the game and kind of the metaphor of what's going on, right?
Sure.
It's we kind of make fun of it. It's like a battle between two dueling wizards.
Yeah.
But getting them, like, every game kind of has a rhythm to it, right? You're on offense, you're on defense, you're trying to stabilize, you're casting spells, kind of get them into the rhythm of what's going on.
Yeah.
And the minutia of like stack mechanics and phases of the turn, it's roughly important, but the details are not.
Okay.
So the one thing I would advise people be mindful of is you want to set your newer players up for future success. So leaving out complexity is fine. You can always teach people details later on down the road, right? If in game 15 you tell someone, oh, we didn't really go over the stack earlier, but now it's important because now we're talking about instance and combat tricks and what have you. That's great. What you don't want to do is teach them blatantly wrong things and contradict yourself down the road.
Gotcha.
Yeah, a big thing that I see, like especially with, I wouldn't say especially here, but I'll get people that'll come to me that are new at Wizards, and they'll be like, yeah, my team, they got me a deck, and my team taught me how to play. I'm like, oh, great. And so I'll like see what deck they have, pull one out, we'll go to start, and they'll be like, oh, they spent 10 minutes talking about mulliganing. And I was like, oh.
The most exciting part of the game.
That does sound exciting.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, throw that one back, grab another hand, let's go. But what they remember, they didn't, like, it doesn't matter if their team did teach them, like, the fun stuff. They remembered that, like, yeah, this was something really hard and we spent a lot of time on. And it's harder for them to, like, not just have fun, but also like remember the fun stuff if that's what they're remembering.
Yeah, I think mulligans and the stack are my two favorite examples of being incorrect but fun, where just like you should not spend a lot of time explaining the mulligan rule in someone's first game, if at all. You should just draw them a functional hand. And similarly, even like the first time that combat tricks come up, you can just say instance you can play during the middle of combat. You don't need the full explanation of how the stack works.
The specifics of where you are in a turn, not important. Some like rough things, you're before combat, you're in combat, you're after combat, whatever. And that's why when you open up the beginner box, the first tutorial game is a scripted experience, right? We make sure you have a playable hand. There's a meter, there's a particular order in which we introduce things to new players to make sure that they're not overwhelmed, that they're engaged, that they're doing things turn to turn, and each turn kind of builds on the previous one.
Yeah, speaking a little bit to the point that you made about not, I don't want to say telling lies because it sounds so mean-spirited, but not saying
lies
something.
are fine,
Sure.
Or are they? You may ask me 3 questions.
That's a great question. Not saying something that you're going to have to contradict down the line relates to something that we spent a lot of time thinking about when we were working on this first experience of, priority number 1 is get people to want to play the second game, get people to understand why it's awesome. Priority number 2 is make people feel like they are equipped to play the second game. And that doesn't mean giving them a comprehensive understanding of the rules. But it does mean that at the end of this first experience, players are going to sit there and feel, I can do it now. Like, I have enough information to actually play a game of Magic. And I think that, learning thing A and then later learning thing B that contradicts thing A is the greatest killer of that feeling. It's like, when I have been proven wrong about something, it's like, oh no, actually this whole time I didn't understand. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind is you're trying to cultivate that feeling of, I know what's going on, I'm prepared to take game actions. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Now, in that space, because you obviously don't want to teach them something that you have to go back on, but Magic is also a game built on cards that do break its own rules. I mean, for
I know
me,
where you're going.
Yeah.
for me, that's some of the most fun stuff is when you get to do stuff that the game says you can't do, but the card says you can. How do you handle that with newer players? Is that something that you seed intentionally in here? Is that something you try to avoid? How do you handle those types of cards?
No, so some of the most powerful moments for a new player are kind of those magic aha moments, right? So while as a teacher, you don't want to be the liar. You don't want to be the person kind of setting negative expectations. But the game is all about breaking expectations, right? So Magic sets up some rules and the cards defy those rules. And that's kind of the very essence of the game, right? So Magic is built on some foundational things.
You said the thing.
In every turn, there's one combat.
Yeah.
Well, what if that wasn't true? Lands tap for 1 mana.
Yeah.
Well, what if that wasn't true, right? Cards break expectations of new players. And when a player sees what is possible, that's the moment where they go, I can see the pieces click, right? The cards work together, the synergy. And that's those moments where they fall in love.
I would even also go as far to say that like those rule breaking moments, they help to reinforce the rules even. Like folks might notice that there's a lot of reminder text in this set, and that's because keywords are like inherently breaking rules.
Yeah.
But we tell you what the keyword does, we remind you what the keyword does, and like seeing trample might get someone, especially someone new who doesn't like realize, that a creature absorbs all of the combat damage, realize like, oh, this says this is an exception to the rule.
Sure.
That must mean that normally a creature blocking would absorb all combat damage.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just a big plus one to that. That's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about when we're designing these experiences. Like in this tutorial sequence in the beginner box, you're going to be playing with creatures that have vigilance, and that every time you attack with a creature with vigilance reinforces, this is the way things normally work, but this keyword is different.
Well, I think that's a good transition. Let's talk specifically about the beginner box and that first play experience, because there is
This beginner box?
this beginner box.
The box?
So for those who aren't familiar with the beginner box, first of all, what is the initial experience that players get in here?
So there is a scripted, mostly scripted, first game that will take 2 people through learning like the basics. It sets them completely up. It comes with a quick start guide that'll tell 2 quick start guides, one for each player, that will tell them what game actions to take and when, and then it lets them finish the game. It sets, just like what Cameron was saying, tries to set them up with the tools of their first game with these 2 smaller decks, and then let them go on to finish it.
And MK, what are the decks themed after?
We have a Cats deck and a Vampires deck.
Why those 2 themes?
Well, there was a lot of reasons. We actually tested a few themes. The Cats deck, in particular, we just know, we've seen through testing that cats are really popular. Like, it's something easy to latch onto. It feels really good.
Of course I have pictures of my cats. We have time. Yes?
No.
No?
No, sorry.
Let's move on.
And we tested a few things for the second theme. We like learned a lot about what is and what isn't easy for like a very first game. For example, we at one point had a graveyard theme for the black packet. And while this is something that's like really fun for your 5th game onwards, we saw that new players, their very first game, were really nervous about their creatures dying in combat. Like they just, like it was stuck into their head that the creature dying was like really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so even when we told them there was like some graveyard mechanics, it's okay if your creature dies, we'll get to do something cool with it. They're like, but creature dying is bad. And even when we told them what to do, they were uncomfortable doing it. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but new players will chump block all day rather than go to 18 life.
Yeah, and also another hang up with the graveyard thing is like milling yourself is something that's very hard to understand why it's good.
Yeah.
I'll also speak to you in terms of the decks being cats and vampires. Something that we were certainly thinking about as we made this, and something that is probably helpful for folks in the audience to keep in mind as they're teaching, is that typal is just extremely powerful. It's one of the, like Matt said earlier, everyone's experience starting Magic is different, and you can't know for sure what your friend is going to be into, but typal is pretty close to the safest bet. It's just very easy for people to understand, like, my deck is about playing a bunch of cats. My deck is about playing a bunch of vampires. And something that's really powerful, I think, in card games in general is players want to feel like their deck is about something.
Yeah.
And that just gives you a very natural answer to, like, oh, here's what my deck is about. And this is something we observed in playtesting the product, even when the two tutorial packets are more optimized for that scripted game than they are for being high synergy. But when players cast Vampire Spawn and dealt 2 damage to their opponent and gained 2 life, they're like, I get it. Like, I'm sucking my opponent's blood. I'm playing a vampire deck. Like, it feels cohesive. And that's something that is important in getting people to play that second game, feeling like they're doing something that makes sense.
Okay.
So, Kevin, I see you out there. You keep reading the comp rules. Your way is valid. I want you to know. I see you, and it's okay. You
Bad news,
keep doing
Kevin.
you.
That's how I learned in unreadable 6-point font.
It's fine. Kevin, you're doing great.
I did have a little chuckle opening the beginner box and seeing how big the print is and the rule, and just being like, that's not how we learned it. We used to walk uphill both ways to play
Tiny,
Magic
tiny
back in my
booklet.
day with tiny rule books.
Yeah.
So you've been talking a lot about, philosophically what excites people and what gets them interested in playing their second game. And in this, you built a specific game with that they're supposed to experience and then get them to the second game. So what did you build into that game to hit those specific points?
Yeah, so all games of Magic kind of have like a rhythm to them and like a flow, and we're really conscious of building in that kind of back and forth. We were trying to, as much as we could, make it so every turn of the game, the people playing would learn something new, and it would like build turn after turn on top of each other. So like your next turn would rely on the information of your like previous turn. An example is actually the first 2 turns of the game. The Cats player will play a Savannah Lions. And the Vampires player will play, I think it's a Vampire Interloper, but it can't block. And that's like the key thing here, is that we show the Cats player how to get in for combat damage that is like direct damage to their opponent without them having to figure out blocking like their very, very first combat. That was a huge thing we saw in playtesting, is that like combat's scary for new players. Like doing the math with like power and toughness is hard and intimidating, and like as we've been like hit on just a couple minutes ago, they're really afraid of losing their creature. And so teaching like dealing damage when it is a situation where there aren't decisions to be made, there isn't a combat between the 2 creatures, simplified it and taught like how to do damage first before we taught 2 creatures in combat.
And we did a lot of playtesting with the tutorial games. Originally, the experience was 2 games, where there was a kind of a simpler initial game, and then we had players play a second game that kind of ramped up the complexity and introduced new cards. And testing proved that was a little bit too long of an experience before we took the training wheels off. So we sort of collapsed both games into one and condensed the experiences.
Yeah, we actually have some of the prototypes I brought in here to show, like, when we like we keep on saying, we went through a lot of testing. Here's, like, let's see if I can get it so you can see it. Here is like the very first, we only had 1 quick start guide. When we first play tested this, we quickly learned that we needed 2. There were 2 siblings. that did not want to share this quick start
Oh,
guide.
Go
as a
figure.
father of 3, I feel that so deeply.
And we're like, oh, we
Yeah,
need to
no,
make
you
2
can't.
of these.
You can't just have
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
There's nothing quite like live testing that very obvious lessons that we should have known.
They just immediately start sniping at each other.
Yeah.
No, give it to me.
Yeah. And so we got to 2. This was our second one.
Yeah.
Still had 2 games in it though. I don't know if you can see from here. These are fat booklets.
Yes.
There's a lot in here.
Things we printed out. Another of the early lessons that we learn is it's very easy, it's relatively easy, to put these guides and a deck in front of new people that may have just never seen Magic and maybe don't have any experience with any trading card games, and get them to sort of pantomime the actions of a Magic game, right? You literally tell them, put this card down onto the table in front of you, turn it sideways, put it into this pile, we'll call it the graveyard, do these things. And they do them, and they sort of mimic their way through the game, move your life counter from 20 to 18, and they feel that they have successfully played. They don't understand anything they have done.
Gee, Matt, how did we go about telling them the why?
I'm so glad you asked. So we took a lot of care to, throughout the tutorial experience, in the characters' voices that are guiding you. So Liliana will literally talk to the player and kind of explain the choices you're making as you make them in her own particular way. Her and Ajani kind of walk you through in their character voices. And this does a couple things. One, it gives you a little bit of insight as to, why you would do the things you're doing. Why am I playing this card instead of this card? The combat decisions I'm making, just a little bit of, once the training wheels are off and you're no longer in that scripted environment, what do I do? Okay, it's turn 6. Okay, now I've gone through 5 combats. Hopefully I understand a little bit about why I would attack, why I would block. Now can I do it on my own? Especially in the situations where maybe a beginner box appears in front of 2 new people because it was given to them as a gift, or they see it in the store and they're like, I'm gonna, give this a shot. And they don't have an experienced player there in person to help guide them through. We're hoping that the tutorial guides can be that person.
Gee, the person who wrote all of that creative text for Johnny and Liliana must be so cool.
I think so too. The second thing it does is it introduces a little bit of the world building, right? It has these 2 very distinct characters that speak in very distinct voices. Hopefully. Well written. Hopefully you appreciate it. And it gives you a little bit of insight into the vast world that is Magic.
Yeah, these prototype booklets actually that NK was showing off earlier, we used these at a really, I would say, like unprecedentedly large external playtest.
Biggest one ever.
Yeah, where we
Very excited about that.
it was really exciting.
We got 100 people.
It's a lot of data.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we got 100 people playtesting it.
And where was that?
It was at PAX.
Nice.
Yeah.
PAX West.
So we had 100 folks who had sort of varying amounts of experience with trading card games, but all were new to Magic.
Sure.
And I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got there was something that bolstered the text that Matt is talking about. People did feel a little bit too much like they were pantomiming and like they didn't understand why they were doing what they were doing. If I recall correctly, that was some of the motivation even for cutting the second game of just, it's going to be better for us to use our real estate on making sure that people understand what the reasoning for their actions are rather than showing them more actions to imitate. And I think that too can be a really powerful driving force in convincing people why Magic is awesome. If you find yourself in a situation where the booklet is telling you, you're going to do thing A, but it would also be reasonable to do thing B or thing C for these reasons. That kind of strategic depth is the kind of thing that can get some players excited about playing more.
Yeah. 2 quick notes on this. One, I'm surprised we changed the title from Cat's Deck V2. This was very, very snappy.
Yeah.
And this was a fun remnant when we discovered an error in the middle of the playtest.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if the camera can get this,
Here,
but
yeah.
wrote new text on an index card
Yeah.
during the lunch break. and taped it in the middle of the playtest.
Yeah, we
So-
really
all
had to
100 of
mobilize.
them.
to all
mobilize to get
100,
those
Why
out.
not?
all
We, like-
100 booklets. Sometimes
Assembly lined it.
that is playtesting in a nutshell. So
Sure is.
Also, quick shout out to the packaging team for the help on this. They had to make 3 different
Yeah.
versions of the quick start guide for us.
Yeah.
It was a time. We had a stapling party. It was.
Matt, I want to go back to you real quick because we've referenced the comprehensive rule guides of yore.
keep at it, Kev. I'm with you.
There is a rules guide in here. I won't
Yeah.
call it a full rules document,
No,
but
far from it.
I was struck again by the differences between what I learned on, which was like I kid you not, it was this big. The cameras aren't on me. It was this big
Big enough to fit in a
starter deck.
in a starter deck,
Yeah.
tournament pack or
And
something.
like super unreadable, but it told a little story, and then it was just like rules. And this is set up different. So because it's not comprehensive on
Right.
any stretch of the imagination. So
Right.
talk about the decisions behind what was put into that rules doc.
We basically wanted to give the player enough information to figure out anything they might encounter in Foundations. So all of the keywords in that set, many of the basic interactions in the game that you're going to find. Basically, anything you'll need to play with Foundations. So whether you're doing Jumpstart or doing the beginner box, or once you venture into the play boosters, you basically have a good, I keep using this, good foundation of rules knowledge.
You're a
It's-
company man.
That's
You're good at
Crushing,
it.
you're crushing.
That's good. Magic the Gathering Foundations, available now at local game stores.
It's not available
not
now.
yet.
It's almost available.
What day is
Friday.
this? Are we live?
We told
Yeah, we're
people
live.
not to lie. Like,
Yeah.
we just told people not
We're
to lie.
live?
We're live. Yeah.
We're not recording this for
No,
later?
We're not.
Can we, back to one. Let's start. Magic the Gathering Foundations, available soon at your local
There you
game
go.
stores. Please ask for availability. So they have enough rules knowledge to basically handle anything they'll encounter in Foundations, and a good solid base, even for sets beyond. Obviously, we don't get into set-specific things in, like, say, standard sets, in that nearest environment. But you're going to get basic turn structure, you're going to get casting spells, you're going to get, things you need to play the game.
Yeah, you'll also find in the glossary descriptions of those mechanics which appear in the set, like raid and landfall,
Yeah.
in addition to the sort of stock Magic stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, we kind of thought about it less of like, read this entire booklet front to back, then you can play Magic, and more like, okay, have this on the table, play in your game. Oh, I have a question. Oh, let me grab the booklet, answer a question, set the booklet back
Yeah.
down. This
Right.
isn't read a bunch of lore, read a bunch of text. Okay, now you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would encourage you too, when you're teaching your friends, to also take that approach. Like, the thing that is awesome about Magic is casting spells and attacking with creatures and discovering synergies. And so the faster you can get into the first game without doing a comprehensive rules download before, the better. So
Yep.
that approach of let's get into the game, and then when we have questions, we'll dig into them, I think is something that's worth mimicking.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing with new players, to kind of use the board game analog, like the quick start guide, like the tutorial experience, that's kind of the rule book you go through at the beginning, where you kind of play through with them. The rules reference is kind of you don't need to read it all, but as you're playing through the game, if you hit something you don't understand, you can quickly go over to that, look it up, get the necessary information, then get back to your game as soon as possible.
Okay. Okay, so that sort of covers the general background of the philosophy of how this was designed, but I want to get into specific tips and tricks for teaching someone. Before we
move
do that,
on,
though,
there is one more thing I want to mention about this product specifically.
Yes.
So the 2 tutorial decks are actually ordered Jumpstart packets.
Yep.
So there are 8 more Jumpstart packets in the beginner box, 2 of each color, that you suppose that 2 new players pick this up off the shelf and they learn to play, then they can play Jumpstart with those 10 packets in total. The tutorial decks make up 2 of those packets. And the reason I mention this is because the approach for Foundations was to kind of create a series of walled gardens where here's the tutorial game that has
a certain complexity cap on it. And here's the beginner box experience where you're playing Jumpstart with these 10 packets, and that's got a higher complexity cap on it. And here's the Jumpstart product, which is sort of the next thing you could do, which has a higher complexity cap on it. And then once you've sort of graduated from those things, you can move on to playing standard or drafting the main set, or these things which are still designed to be approachable, but there's sort of this series of concentric circles of complexity. And at each step, the key point is that at each step there is variety, right? So within that 10 beginner box packets, there's 2 packets of every color, and we try to make sure that there are diverse play styles represented among them, because again, you don't know what the person you're teaching Magic is going to be into. So I would encourage you to also think about this approach when you're teaching folks Magic. Like, at every step of the process, yes, you should be constraining complexity, but you also want to make sure that there's enough different stuff. Like, if you are playing against someone, if you're teaching someone to play with 2 draft decks that you have from previous FNMs, and you're just playing the same draft decks against each other over and over again, it's going to be a lot harder to, that person isn't getting the full picture of the diversity that makes Magic cool. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, we know that identity and identifying with the game and identifying as a player or as a specific player is something that's really popular and something people latch onto early. And it's important to give people the opportunity to find what they feel play in a way that feels like them, because that love, that joy is what's going to get them to play more games.
Okay.
Well, you two know a lot. I can see why you're here. I don't know why I'm here, but this thing is weighty. You weren't kidding. You get a lot. 2 instant play decks, 2 learn to play guides, 2 play mats, 8 jumpstart decks, and 2 spin downs. There's quite a here. And there's a tagline on the back. They wrote a tagline. It says, "Learn to play, play to learn."
Wow, you get the tagline for free?
The tagline is for free. The reason that tagline is here is there wasn't enough room for the original tagline, which was the only way to learn is by playing, the only way to play is by learning.
I'm familiar. Yeah.
But that's
okay. So now let's get into tips and tricks for teaching people how to play Magic. Hi, Matt.
How you doing? I'm good. How are you? This is my first time on the show. I'm very excited.
You're nervous. I can tell.
I'm very excited. Oh, I have a tip.
What's that?
Well, I have a tip for teaching somebody else how to play.
Great. Let's hear it.
Lose.
That's a really good tip.
That's actually a serious tip. He's not.
That is
Everything
really
leading up to that, don't take it at face value. But talk more about that.
Lose.
Okay.
It's very exciting to win your first game of Magic. And if you're an experienced player, you don't need to win your 9,614th game of Magic. So if you can find a way,
you don't know me at all, Matt.
if you can find a way to throw it and not, make it obvious, don't embarrass yourself. But it's just throw them a bone. Make they can win. That's a cool moment. Let them have that.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit. Think of the rhythm of the game, the beats of the game.
Yeah.
Like big swings are memorable.
Right. You are setting them up to beat them in meaningful games for a lifetime. Right? You want them to be worthy competition at tournaments for the rest of your lives.
Yeah, that's true.
Let them have the tutorial game.
All right. Other advice, tips, tricks.
Short games. I recommend 10 Life because one of the things that we learned was that like especially setting up, there's just a lot with starting a game that is really intimidating and really hard for new players. And oftentimes by the time they get to the end of a long game, they will have forgotten the beginning. And so 10 Life, play really short, quick, and fast games if possible.
Yeah, I think, and this is related to the thing we were talking about earlier about being fun and efficient more than correct. Clumping together the actions that players take every turn is really valuable. It's a lot harder to parse. You've got an untap step and then an upkeep step which doesn't actually mean anything except sometimes it will, and then a draw step where you draw your card, and then you've got a main phase, and during each of your turns you can play a land during your main phase. This is a lot harder to digest than untap your cards, draw a card, play a land.
Yeah.
And that clumping of actions is not
really strictly accurate to the Magic rules. But it's one of the things that, like, getting those, you know, the things that you do every turn, getting that down can be one of those things that really engenders that feeling of, I know what's going on, I'm prepared to play Magic. So I really recommend when you teach Magic to clump those actions together and make sure that's something you emphasize, because once players get that, that's a lot of the game, and that it can build confidence.
And going off of that, I know we talked about earlier, like it doesn't, you don't have to be completely rules correct. You also don't have to be completely like optimally playing. I can't count how many times I've got. Yeah, I know.
I mentally did the same thing.
But like I can't like so many times I've sat down with a new player, especially if they had someone else like try to teach them ahead of time, and they'll be like, "Oh, I thought that I could only play creatures in my second main phase." Yes, they should know that they can play cards in their second main phase. I'm not saying like don't tell them, but I've been helping someone learn to play Magic, and I saw someone go like, "Oh no, don't play that after combat. Play that after combat." And they're like, "What? Why?" It's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
optimal."
Because reason it's
don't like.
Because you're bluffing things that you don't even know exist yet.
Yeah, don't try to do that. In the same vein, like I think it's pretty common, but playing with hands revealed, make sure they might not see an instant their entire first game. But if you have an instant and your hand's revealed, you can talk about it, and that makes it more likely that they can like see it and connect it and understand what it means.
And I totally get the impulse to try to front load all that information. Like, you have spent, all of us have spent a lot of time playing Magic, and we have a lot of years of experience and tendencies, and like when you're playing against your friend and they have their hand revealed, it totally makes sense to me that you want to say like, this is the thing that you should do. But as self-driven as they can be, you want to really optimize for that, and it's much better to have them, lightning strike your face, but they were like, can I cast this card in my hand, and how does it work? And like being self-driven is so important. So that's something to keep in mind as you're playing games with revealed hands. Just like try to avoid being prescriptive, but it's an impulse that I totally get. Like I understand why it's common for people to feel that way.
All right. I have one more question before we get to the end, but I also want to let you all back there know, out in Twitch chat land, if you have questions for the crew, if you have questions about your experience teaching or learning Magic that you'd love some answers on, at least two of these people are perfectly capable of answering them, and Matt's also here. Feel free to put them in chat, and we will answer whatever we can. As long as it's about teaching and learning Magic, or foundations. The last one I had was kind of what are some common misconceptions or errors people make when they're trying to teach people to play Magic?
Yeah, there are a lot of these that come up over and over again when we're playtesting these products. People will often block with an untapped creature and then tap it, or pay a creature's mana cost to block with it.
Yep.
The one that I think is most useful to point out, because it's so intuitive to us now, but is actually very unintuitive to most people who are starting, is like when you see the mana cost that's a 2 generic mana and a white mana, that just really looks like it says 2 white mana. But that's not what it's saying. It's saying 2. And so the thing that I found useful there when explaining it to people is you just say, oh, this isn't 2 white. That's not how you read it. It's 2 plus white.
Yeah.
You just say plus in between all the mana symbols, and that often gets it. But I think like zooming out a little bit, the most important thing about all these common misconceptions is you know how to play Magic. You're going to catch them. You're going to see them when your friend makes these mistakes. Just be patient. A lot of the time it will take 5, 6, 13 times saying one of these things for people to get it, because intuitiveness and inertia is just a really hard force to fight. So, making sure that people don't feel that you're talking down to them, and having patience, because you just are going to have to repeat these things so many times, is worth paying attention to.
Another big one is people attacking creatures rather than attacking opponents. And I think like Mac actually talked about this a little bit, like the the meta narrative of the game. I've found that the whole like you are two wizards dueling and like you're attacking your opponent wizard and they send a creature out to defend them is the way that I've had the most success teaching that concept. But to Cameron's point, it's not something they're going to get on the first time. It is something that's going to take time and practice and repetition for them to get that, like, to be intuitive to them.
Yeah, I think being precise about how you use language is really valuable here. When you cast a spell and you're reading it to your friend and you say it's mana cost, say 2+ a white. Yeah. When you're attacking, don't say, I'm going to attack with Savannah Lions. Say, I'm going to attack you with Savannah Lions. And being precise about using your language in that way can help clarify.
And reinforce.
Reinforce is the word I was looking for, yeah.
I got you.
And I think a lot of it is, like we said back at the beginning, being very cognizant of who you're teaching the game to, right? Being aware of their experience. Are they coming to Magic from a different game? What biases do they have? What previous experiences do they have? Like if they have experiences with other games, what rules, like misinterpretations, might they bring with them that they apply to Magic?
Yeah.
That can play a big role. And like I said, being precise with your wording is a very good concept. Some of the misconceptions that were previously mentioned, paying mana costs repeatedly to attack and block, that comes up a lot. Misreading mana costs, not understanding when sorceries and instants can be played, getting those mixed up, I find a lot, and just not being aware that they can play cards on the opponent's turn, just not being aware of instants as a concept comes up quite a bit.
Okay.
So.
I have a couple questions in chat here.
Hi, chat.
I'll take the first one. It says, how long will Foundation's booster boxes be printed for? Will it be the full 5 years? Yeah, this generally goes for standard sets. As long as a product is legal and standard and people are still buying it, we will continue printing it. So our intention is for Foundations to be available on shelves as long as it is still standard legal.
Magic the Gathering Foundations on sale soon.
Yes,
I've heard.
Yes. All right. Now, I thought this was it was a comment, but I thought it was interesting because it talks about a completely different direction for teaching, and I wanted your thoughts on this. So the comment is, people usually learn a lot better if they simply watch a game of experienced people play. The very basics you can see and catch on. Was there any discussion or testing on watching versus playing for new players?
Well, we certainly watched a lot.
We did do, in our first play test, we did a couple of surveys and exit surveys. Our first play test had a combination of people who were brand new to Magic and who had been playing less than like a year or 2 years. And we asked them, the ones that had been playing a short period of time, we asked them how they learned. And it was something that like a couple of them talked about, but mostly they talked about it in that it was really hard for them to follow. Even when like they would, a pair of playtesters would get done and like watch the game next to them, they said they found it hard to follow. And so while there's some amount to be learned of like the flow of Magic from that, I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier of that a lot of us, it's hard for us to remember what it was like to be a new player, and things that are so like obvious and easy for us, especially things that we do fast, is not something that new players are able to catch on to. And so while it's certainly a tool, I really wouldn't jump to it as the first option, because we saw in our playtest that doing it and taking the actions, and that's why we did a scripted sequence, like getting them to physically take the actions is what really connected it, like what they were doing to like what like the strategy in their head.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'm at. I think there is potential to, in watching a game, for someone watching to to learn there, but I think you need two things. One, I think you need the people playing the game to be very helpful
Yes.
in explaining why they're doing what they're doing. And I think you need the person watching to already have a baseline understanding of kind of the flow of what's going on for that to really be an instructive experience. And I think if you're a very new player, there's really nothing that's going to replace kind of, pardon the choice of words here, but the magic of getting cards in your hand and, physically playing them. Like that's really for a lot of people, and I would say most people, where kind of that, again, I just keep doing the marketing phrases, where that spark ignites, right? Like that's where you feel it.
You're good at this. We should have had you on the show much earlier.
It is sad that this is my first time.
This is your first time, yeah.
I can't wait for my next first time.
So evaluating the approach of having people watch a game of Magic to learn on our two primary objectives of you want to play your next game and you feel confident enough to actually do it. I think that watching a game of Magic is actually probably really good.
Yeah.
Well, I won't even say probably. It definitely is really good at getting people to want to play, especially if you're sitting at a table with a bunch of friends who are playing Commander. It's like, my friends are hanging out, they're laughing, they're having a great time. Someone just put 40 pieces of cardboard onto the table with Avengers Zendikar. That looks awesome. I want to do that. But I do think that it is markedly worse at building confidence. When you're not physically taking the actions, you're not building the muscle memory, you're not doing those things that we were describing earlier to build up the routine and get accustomed to handling cardboard. I think it just makes it much harder for people to then sit down and feel confident that they're going to be able to do it themselves. But I'll totally say, I think if you want to get someone into Magic, that having them watch a game and telling them a story about what's happening and explaining sort of vaguely what's going on can be a good way to get them excited. It's just, I think it's not going to get them to actually be able to take the game action.
Right, on the list of things you could do to get someone into Magic, having them watch a game of Magic is on the list.
Yeah.
That's why I say it's a tool.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's not it isn't the end all be all, but it is a tool that can be used to get them to want to play.
All right. I think this is going to be the last question. It's a bit of a pithy, tongue-in-cheek question, but I think there's
My favorite.
but I think there's a really good question behind it. So the question is written is so when is Mutate first being introduced to beginners?
Yeah, that's in the 9th pack.
I can
But
tell that.
I think, Cameron, you talked earlier about sort of expanding the web of complexity. So where, and this is going to be, sort of wishy-washy, I imagine, but where do you view that sort of ceiling for, or the line between complexity and excitement? Mutate's cool. Seeing your creature change into another creature and get more abilities and do all kinds of crazy things is cool, but it's obviously very complicated. So kind of how do you draw that line when you're teaching?
Yeah, I think there's a step in every Magic player's journey where the process of thumbing through a long box of cards becomes really exciting. And that, to me, is sort of the step at which I expect people to encounter those more off-the-wall mechanics like Mutate.
Sure.
And that does happen, I think, well after the first 10 games of Magic or so. You really do need to kind of understand the flow of the game before you get into, I'm going to look at my friend's random collection of cards and get excited about stuff. But that is a super valuable and a super important step because, again, I know I've said this many, many times, but you don't know what's going to get someone excited.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that they're exposed to as much variety as possible. Mutate. Mutate's a tough one.
Mutate's great for a new player.
Speak more on that.
And here's why. Mutate is sort of emblematic of a variety of keywords that experienced players think of as super complex because we are aware of the entirety of Magic and all of the complex interactions that a keyword like Mutate enables. Right? Inside its own environment, Mutate is great. It's flavorful, maybe a little too flavorful with the non-human aspect, but that's an argument for a different show. it enables these really cool moments of I'm mutating my creature into this other amazing creature, and now it's got a cool new abilities. It provides for a great story, right? It introduces the possibility of that aha moment of Magic can do cool stuff, right? The new player is not aware of all the corner cases. And there was a great thread on a social media site, which I don't know if I can name, by one Carmen Klemperens. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Where she warned against the danger of infantilizing new players. And I think an instantly adverse reaction to mutate is doing just that. Like, yeah, probably mutate specifically might be on the side of too complex. And it's certainly not something you're going to put in a tutorial game. And it's, it's a little down the road, but it's not as far down the road as you'd think, right? You need to provide as many possibilities that the player falls in love as you can. And mutate is another swing. And you need to take as many swings as you can to get something to connect.
Yeah, I definitely agree that mutate is a better pick to introduce to your friend who's just starting Magic than mechanics that are enormous skill amplifiers, for example. Just because, like, the more reliably the stronger player is winning the game, the less fun it is for the weaker player. I do think mutate is quite complex, though. There are a lot of moving pieces. Even just learning the base functionality of how the cards stack and what characteristics they have.
But I think if you look at something like even double-faced cards, there's a lot of complexity, whether they're modal or transforming.
Especially the modal ones.
But my son's 6, and he loves those things.
Right.
He's like, then it changes into this, and I get you.
Exactly.
The story's really good.
I love
story's
mutate.
really good.
Kevin loves mutate.
And
I love Kevin.
It speaks to like a really like common and a Magic moment that I think that a lot of Magic players go through, and that is like learning that synergy, learning that like things can work together, and that
Like
is
the three of us.
Thanks.
Four of us.
We
You're
do.
here too.
Oh, yes.
4 of us.
Oh, no, I thought you were excluding yourself
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
That's been the running gag.
Like the 3 of you.
But mutate could be that like things
could be, yeah.
can work together.
Yeah.
Like I feel internally we always use Johnny's Primate as the example of like, doing like life gain can give me a bonus. That's so cool. It could be like that joy of learning, that satisfying like click, and that like heuristic of like building that heuristic. It is satisfying. That could be it.
Yeah. All right. On that note, we are just about out of time. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks to, yes, all 3. Yes.
What a wonderful rehearsal that was. I'm so ready to do this.
Hopefully you learned a little bit about some of the best ways and methods and philosophy behind teaching players. And you can pick up a beginner box for your friend, teach them, or maybe for yourself. But Foundations releases everywhere starting this Friday. Yeah, that's it for this show. Weekly MTG is going to be off next week because it's my birthday and I feel like it. And then we're going to be off the following week because it is the week of Thanksgiving in the United States and not a lot of people are going to be working. We are going to be back on December 3rd with Innistrad Remastered previews. So that's very exciting, really cool. We're going to have that show. We're going to have another exciting show on December 10th. So until then, thanks for tuning in.
Happy birthday
Not yet.
to you. Well, we won't be here.
It is my son's birthday today.
Happy birthday to him. Happy birthday.